I'm Clarissa Hale, 34, front desk manager at a boutique hotel in Charleston. Most days, I spend my time fixing other people's chaos, missing keys. Double bookings, lost luggage, order calms me. But that night, as I pushed open the front door of my parents' house in Savannah, order was the last thing I found. The air inside was heavy and wet, carrying the scent of mildew and something sour. My flashlight beam swept across the living room sofa cushions torn, a lamp on its side, glass crunching under my shoes. Mom's framed recipe for peach cobbler hung crooked, the glass cracked through her handwriting. My throat tightened. I called out softly, "Mom, Dad." My voice sounded small, swallowed by the dark. Only the ticking clock answered, still running even though everything else seemed broken. The phone in my pocket buzzed once Detective Marcus Bell returning my earlier message, but I didn't answer. I couldn't leave. I needed to see. I stepped deeper into the hallway, past the kitchen where a cup of coffee had turned cold to sludge. Then it came a slow, dragging sound above me, like furniture scraping across wood. I froze. My parents' attic had always frightened me as a child. It was where the house creaked the loudest, where the summer heat collected like breath. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by a faint whimper. Hands shaking, I tugged the pull-down ladder. The hinges groaned. Warm air spilled down. I climbed, one rung at a time, the flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam caught a shape in the far corner, a small boy crouched beside an overturned box. Evan. My voice cracked. He lifted his head, lips split, eyes wide, skin ashen. His teddy bear hung from one hand. I crawled toward him, heart hammering. Where are Grandma and Grandpa a week earlier? My life still ran on the rhythm of other people's needs. Guests lined the marble counter of the Charleston Hotel, asking for early check-ins, extra towels, directions to the waterfront. I smiled through it all, my voice steady, my hair pinned neatly despite the coastal humidity. That was who I was: dependable, composed, efficient, the kind of woman who answered every problem except her own. Between check-ins, my phone kept buzzing in my pocket. Mom, then again, and again. I glanced at her name on the screen but silenced it, promising myself I'd call her back after the dinner rush. When I finally left the lobby at midnight, exhaustion won. I told myself they probably just wanted to chat about the weather, or the store, or my brother. Always Darren. The next morning, the message came from a number I hadn't seen in years. "This is Mrs. Whitmore from across the street. The shop's been closed all week. Is everything all right with your parents?" My stomach sank. Hale's Market hadn't been closed for a full day since my grandfather opened it in 1952. Even hurricanes hadn't kept my father from unlocking those doors by sunrise. I tried calling again. No answer. I texted, emailed, left voicemails that played my own voice back at me in the still air of my apartment. By Thursday, guilt had rooted itself deep in my chest. I could hear Mom's gentle laugh in my head. "You worry too much." "Honey," but the silence felt wrong, thick and deliberate. I asked my supervisor for emergency leave. He looked surprised. I never asked for time off. By dusk, my suitcase was in the passenger seat, the road to Savannah stretching ahead like a dark ribbon. As I crossed the long bridges over the marshes, the air smelled of salt and pine. I thought about Darren, the charming failure who always found a way to be forgiven, and about how, for years, I'd let the distance between us feel like safety. I didn't know it then, but that distance was already closing. Evan's body felt weightless in my arms as I carried him down the steps. His small fingers clutched my sleeve, refusing to let go even as I strapped him into the back seat. The drive to Memorial Hospital blurred into flashing lights and shallow breaths. I kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror, terrified that if I blinked, he'd vanish too. By the time we arrived, the nurses moved fast, checking vitals, sliding IV lines into his thin arms, calling for fluids. The doctor's tone was measured but grim. Severely dehydrated, malnourished, possible trauma response. We'll keep him for observation. I nodded, but the words scattered like ash. When they led me to the waiting area, the room tilted under the hum of fluorescent light. Evan's teddy bear was still in my hand. Its fur smelled of dust and fear. I sat there gripping it until a man in plain clothes approached Detective Marcus Bell. Tall, quiet, mid-40s. His voice was calm, but carried the weight of too many similar nights. "Ms. Hale," he said, sitting across from me. "We need to talk about your brother." The name landed like a bruise. Darren. I hadn't said it aloud in months. Bell flipped open a small notebook, asking about gambling debts, friends who might know his whereabouts, arguments with our parents. I tried to answer, but each question drew me backward. To that Thanksgiving 3 years ago, the smell of burnt turkey, the clatter of a chair, Darren shouting, demanding money, our father's refusal, the shove that sent him into the wall, Mom's scream, the silence after. I hadn't gone home for the holidays since. Bell studied me for a long moment. "Your brother's name keeps coming up," he said quietly. "Neighbors saw him near the house last week with 2 other men." I stared at the sterile floor tiles, trying to breathe past the rising dread. Through the glass wall, I could see Evan's small form lying under white sheets, chest rising unevenly. Whatever happened in that house, he had survived it, but survival didn't mean safety. Not yet. By morning, the police tape fluttered like torn ribbon across my parents' front porch. Detective Bell and his team moved through the rooms in quiet precision, photographing, dusting, collecting fragments of a life that used to be ordinary. I stood behind the gate, the humid air thick with the scent of wet earth and magnolia. Every creak of the floorboards inside felt like an echo from the night before. When they finally released me, I walked to Forsyth Park just as dawn began to break. The fountains hadn't started yet. The world was still half asleep, bathed in the pale gray of early morning. Spanish moss hung low from the oak branches, brushing the tops of empty benches. I sat on one, hands trembling in my lap, trying to anchor myself in the place where life had once felt simple. This was where we used to come for picnics, Mom's quilt, Dad's old thermos of lemonade, Darren tossing a football toward me with that perfect grin that never reached his eyes. I used to think the shadow between us was just jealousy. Now it felt like prophecy. When I returned to the hospital, Evan was sitting up in bed, a coloring book open before him. A nurse named Lila was gently guiding his small hand, helping him hold a crayon. "He's been drawing since he woke up," she whispered. "It seems to calm him." I crouched beside the bed, forcing a smile. Evan's drawing wasn't of superheroes or houses. It was of our front hallway, 2 tall shapes standing near the door, arms black with what looked like tattoos, and a long red streak down the stairs. My stomach tightened. "Evan," I said softly, "are these the men who came to the house?" He looked at me, eyes wide but hollow, then nodded once and turned the page. The next drawing was only red thick, uneven, filling the whole paper. Later, Detective Bell met me outside the ward. Neighbors mentioned shouting. He said, "2 men with markings on their arms. One looked a lot like your brother." The world seemed to tilt again. The weight of his words pressed against my chest until breathing hurt. I glanced through the window toward Evan, small and silent, and understood that whatever my brother had done, it had already changed everything. 2 days later, the investigators called me back to the house. By then, the chaos inside had been reduced to quiet, labeled evidence. The smell of bleach lingered faintly in the air. I followed Detective Bell through the narrow hallway toward my father's study, a small room tucked behind the kitchen. It had always been his refuge, a place for bills, ledgers, and the slow rhythm of his pen scratching across paper. The desk stood exactly where I remembered it, the oak dulled by age but sturdy. Like him, one of the technicians gestured toward the bottom drawer. "We found something wedged behind it," he said, carefully sliding out a faded yellow envelope. Belle read the name written across the front, then looked at me. My father's handwriting was unmistakable precise, slanted slightly to the right. "To my daughter, Clarissa." I took it from him with trembling hands. The paper was rough, the edges smudged, as if it had been handled too often in fear. I unfolded the letter slowly, afraid it might crumble. "My dear girl," it began. "If you are reading this, something has gone wrong. Your mother and I tried to reason with Darren, but he has changed. We love him, but we have also failed him. We let our mercy become blindness. He came again this week with men I didn't know. He spoke of selling the store, of debts he can't repay. We refused, and he grew violent. We're frightened, Clarissa, but we won't leave the home your grandfather built. Please understand, we never wanted to burden you. Take care of Evan." Protect him the way we couldn't protect his father from himself. The signature at the bottom bled slightly into the paper, the ink warped by what looked like a water stain or maybe a tear. I sank into my father's old chair, the letter shaking in my grip. They had written this knowing they might not survive. For all the years I'd resented their silence, I had never imagined it was fear keeping them quiet. Belle knelt beside me, his voice low. "May I?" I handed him the letter. He slid it carefully into an evidence bag, sealing it with a quiet snap. It felt like sealing my parents inside their own confession. The call came just after dawn. Detective Bell's voice was steady but low, the kind that already carried bad news. "We found your brother's truck," he said, "near the docks, by the Savannah River. I thought you might want to see for yourself. By the time we reached the water, the sun was climbing above the warehouses, spilling pale light across the current. The truck sat half-sunken in mud, its doors open, the back seat littered with fast food wrappers and cigarette burns. 2 officers were photographing the scene while another lifted items from a plastic crate. Belle handed me a small evidence bag. Inside was a cracked leather wallet, an empty bottle of bourbon, and a photograph. My breath caught the photo showed Evan, smiling at the beach, his curls whipped by wind. The picture had been folded in half, right through the middle of his face. I turned away, nausea rising with the smell of river water and oil. Belle's voice came from behind me, softer now. "Looks like he's been living out of the truck for a while. We'll keep searching nearby." I nodded, unable to speak. The sound of water against the pilings filled the silence between us. Somewhere downstream, a barge horn moaned a long, mournful note that felt almost human. The last time I'd spoken to Darren came rushing back a late-night call 6 months ago. His voice was slurred, pleading. "Just this once. Claire, I'll pay you back. You're all I've got." I remember staring at my reflection in the dark window, anger and fatigue twining together until I hung up without a word. I'd told myself it was the right thing to stop feeding his chaos. Now, standing beside the river, that certainty dissolved. The police carried on behind me, voices low and procedural, but I barely heard them. I crouched by the water's edge, my reflection trembling in the current. The folded photograph pressed against my palm, wet from my tears. "I should have gone home sooner," I whispered, but the wind carried the words away before anyone could answer. They found Darren 3 nights later in a run-down motel on the outskirts of Savannah. Belle called me at sunset, his tone professional but edged with something close to relief. "He's in custody." He said, "You don't have to come, but you might want to hear this for yourself." The police station was colder than I expected, all concrete and buzzing lights. Belle guided me to a narrow hallway lined with mirrored glass. Behind it, in a small interrogation room, my brother sat hunched over the table. His hair was greasy, his shirt wrinkled, his hands trembling. Even from behind the glass, I could smell the stale air of regret clinging to him. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who sneaked me candy from Dad's store, who could charm anyone with a grin that promised mischief but never harm. That version of him was gone. Belle and another officer entered the room. Darren barely looked up. His voice cracked as he spoke. It wasn't supposed to happen. They wouldn't listen. They said no again, told me I was a disgrace. I just lost it. He pressed his palms against his eyes. I didn't mean to. Claire. I swear I didn't mean to. Belle's tone stayed even. You struck your father, Darren nodded once. He fell. Mom tried to stop me. Then the others panicked. We didn't know what to do. His breath hitched. We took them, put them out by the old lumber lot. I thought I'd come back. I thought I could fix it. Every word landed like glass breaking inside my chest. My reflection in the mirror looked pale, unfamiliar. I wanted to scream, to hit the glass, to demand why, but no sound came. Belle's gaze met mine through the one-way glass. His voice, quiet but firm, reached me from the doorway. You don't owe him forgiveness. Clarissa. I nodded, though the motion barely registered. Inside the interrogation room, Darren kept talking, his words dissolving into sobs. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, not toward him, but toward the space between us, a barrier that felt, finally, impossible to cross. The funeral took place on a cloudless morning, the kind of southern day where even grief felt heavy in the air. Beneath the wide oaks of Bonaventure Cemetery, sunlight sifted through hanging moss and fell across two matching caskets. Someone had arranged chrysanthemums in simple glass vases, their white petals trembling in the breeze from the river. Neighbors gathered quietly, most of them customers from the store faces I half remembered from childhood, kind but lined with sympathy. A few stepped forward to squeeze my hand. Their words blurred together, such good people, such tragedy. The pastor, an older man with a voice like worn wood, spoke about grace through accountability, about how love can blind, and how forgiveness, even when it feels impossible, keeps the living from turning to stone. I stood with Evan beside me, his small hand tucked in mine. He was dressed in a blue shirt that hung loose at the shoulders. His eyes stayed on the ground, where two names were carved into pale wood markers waiting to be replaced by stone. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't have a speech prepared. The air around me smelled of damp soil and flowers, and for a moment I just listened to the wind moving through the trees. Then I said, they loved us, even when they shouldn't have. Maybe that was their gift and their flaw. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. I can't undo what happened, but I can promise one thing. Evan will grow up safe. He will know love without fear. The pastor bowed his head, murmuring a prayer, and the crowd followed. A soft rain began to fall, dotting the earth like tears. I knelt and pressed my palm against the fresh mound of soil, feeling its coolness seep through my skin. When I stood again, Evan slipped his hand back into mine. Together, we watched the rain fade into sunlight breaking through the moss, and I felt something in me settle, not peace, not yet, but the start of it. Weeks passed before I could bring myself to return to the house. The police had cleared it, the evidence sealed away, but I hadn't stepped inside since that night. Now, standing on the front porch with the key cold in my hand, the silence felt different, emptier, almost tender. The for sale sign leaned slightly in the yard, half shadowed by the same oak tree where my father used to hang wind chimes. Inside, the air smelled of dust and lemon polish. Every sound seemed magnified the echo of my steps, the slow hum of summer insects outside. I moved through the rooms one by one, touching the edges of furniture left behind. The walls still bore faint outlines where family photos had hung, rectangles of lighter paint against the years. The pull-down ladder waited in the hallway, its metal chain glinting in the light. For a moment, my hand hovered over it. I thought of Evan, of the small, trembling body I'd carried down from that darkness. But something in me needed to climb again to face it, not as a place of terror, but as a memory that deserved gentleness. The attic smelled of wood and sunlight. Afternoon light streamed through the small window, scattering dust like gold flakes. In one corner, half buried beneath a blanket, lay Evan's teddy bear. Its fur was cleaner now, brushed by time rather than fear. Beside it, on a low beam, sat a bottle of my mother's perfume glass curved like a tear, faint scent of lilac still clinging to the air. I picked them up, cradled them both, and whispered, "It's time to let you rest." Then I set the bear and bottle together beneath the light, the way you might leave flowers for the living. When I climbed down, I left the bulb on and closed the hatch softly behind me. Upstairs, the attic glowed like a heartbeat steady, warm, and finally at peace. Charleston's salt air carried through the open windows, blending with the faint scent of something baking in the oven. The apartment felt lived in, now warm, a little cluttered, full of small, ordinary sounds. Evan sat cross-legged at the coffee table, drawing with colored pencils scattered like candy wrappers. His laughter came easily these days, lighter than I remembered, as if the weight of Savannah had finally loosened its hold. I watched him sketch a row of houses beneath a bright yellow sun. He looked up and grinned. "This one's ours," he said. Circling a small blue door, his voice was sure. "Steady." I smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind his ear. Work had changed, too. Between shifts, I'd begun building something new, a small scholarship in my parents' names for children affected by domestic violence. The first applications had already come in shy handwriting. Brave words, stories that mirrored the kind of silence I once ignored. It wasn't much, but it felt right, like placing something good back into a world that had taken too much. As evening settled, I carried 2 mugs of cocoa to the balcony. The horizon was fading into pink and gray, the waves below brushing the shore in steady rhythm. Evan leaned against my arm, the warmth of his small frame grounding me in a way nothing else could. "Will we ever go back to that house?" he asked softly. I looked toward the darkening water. "Only in stories, sweetheart," I said. He nodded, content with the answer. I rested my chin on his hair, breathing in the sweetness of cocoa and sea air. The city lights flickered on, one by one, like quiet promises keeping watch. The attic once held our fear, but now it holds our light.